Welcome back to our podcast. I'm here today with Tim Petersen. Tim is the president and CEO of WorkSafeNB, and we've been having a great discussion here around the board of directors of WorkSafeNB, how the organization operates, setting of assessment rates, some of the key trends, frequency, and so on. So I want to move now into three topics that I guess are really core to the focus of prevention, and that is legislation, education, and enforcement. So on legislation, let's start with it. Always of interest, of course, to our listeners, what legislation topics are being currently reviewed or updated by WorkSafe? What's in the books?
What's in the books? So there's been a lot happening from a lot of really good things happening from a legislation and regulation standpoint. I guess I would focus in on a couple of areas. Fishing is one. So our fishing industry has historically not been covered by occupational health and safety legislation in the province of New Brunswick. Specifically, fishing vessels have been excluded from the definition of place of employment. So we've never really had any opportunity to engage with that industry. Recently, just last fall, actually, there was new legislation introduced that includes now fishing vessels in the definition of place of employment, which means that now the fishing industry and those fishing vessels and the people on those fishing vessels now have to comply with the Occupational Health and Safety Act and all the regulations. This is legislative change we have pursued for the better part of 3 decades. So I was very pleased and continue to be very pleased that we finally have that legislation in place. We are working very closely with the fishing industry. We've engaged, again, I know I've used the word collaboration a lot, but collaboration is really important, and this is a key example. And we've engaged in face-to-face meetings with all of the associations throughout the province. We want to help. We want to educate. We want to help you out to get set up. Now, this legislation, while it was passed last year, comes into force in June of 2024. And we did that specifically because we wanted to allow the industry time to be able to properly prepare, not just put it on everyone on day one. And part of that preparation will be us collaborating and educating. So very pleased about that.
So what kind of things would be covered there?
Well, the key issue, I mean, it will cover everything that's covered for other workplaces, but the key issue for the fishing industry is the use of PFDs, personal flotation devices. So the legislation now mandates the use of PFDs. So unless you're in the cabin of the boat, like down underneath, if you're on the deck, you need to be wearing a PFD. End of story. And that just hasn't been the case. And we've seen, in New Brunswick alone, over the past couple of decades, we've had double-digit numbers of fatalities. Even as recently as last year, a 15-year-old boy. And I wouldn't sit here and tell you that in 100% of the cases, a PFD would have saved lives, but it would have in a significant number. Maybe not 100%, but people who have died in the waters of New Brunswick, if they were wearing a PFD, they would have been saved. So this is really, it's historical legislation, and I'm very pleased that we're able to achieve that, working with the government, obviously. So that's fishing. We've been doing.
Excuse me, before we leave fishing.
Okay.
Enforcement of that. I know an issue used to be, I heard people talk about is that, well, great when they're in port, your officers can go on the boats and so on. But what about when they leave port?
Most of the enforcement here clearly is going to be when they're at the dock. That's when we're going to be doing most of the enforcement. To me, the real key here is really getting the leadership on board with health and safety. So the captains of the boats, like understanding that you're now required to do specific things, one would hope that people would take those obligations seriously. Now, if you're out at sea and WorkSafe was going to do a surprise visit, well, you're going to see us coming from a mile away regardless. You're going to put on your PFDs, and as soon as we leave, you're going to take them off. Yeah. So that's not the answer. The answer here is really about trying to hammer home the benefits of doing it and now your obligations. And I mentioned being out at various meetings. I remember very specifically, I'll never forget being at a town hall meeting in St. George, and the room we were in was full, and this is a very emotional issue, right? Because there are a lot of people that they don't want to be regulated. Don't tell me what I have to do. Don't tell me I have to wear a PFD. A gentleman stood up, and the room went quiet. The gentleman stood up, and he said, very simply, "I'm the captain of my boat, and no one gets on my boat without a PFD." And he sat down. And I thought, okay, this is the people that we need. This is the attitude that we need. So it's not going to be, we're not going to get where we need to be because WorkSafe's out on the waters, doing surprise visits. We're going to get there because we get the leadership to understand this is what you need to be doing to protect your people, to protect your and many of them young people. They need to come home at the end of the day.
Other legislation,
a lot of work on Regulation 91-191. So that is the key regulation under the Occupational Health and Safety Act that really lays out your obligations specific to different areas. So whether it's the logging industry or mining, or it's confined space issues or ventilation. All of those details are laid out in Regulation 91-191. It hadn't been really updated for well over a decade. So we've gone through the entire 400-page regulation, and we're updating everything. And we're doing it in 3 phases because it's such a massive piece of work that, again, we wanted to allow industry time to be able to get on board with this. So we didn't want to sort of dump all of the changes on industry at one time. So we took this approach to do it in 3 phases. We've had 2 phases completed and the regulation updated. Excuse me. We're working on phase 3. The key pieces of key areas, I guess I would say, are logging and silviculture, air quality and ventilation, occupational exposure limits, electrical issues, and confined space. Those are some of the key areas that we're addressing through these phases of regulatory change. We're doing a lot of work on harmonization. So we've harmonized standards with respect to fall arrest equipment and head, face, eye, and footwear. So far, we've harmonized on those issues. When I say harmonized, I mean we're working with our counterparts across the country. And the next one that we're looking at is first aid training. So we're really trying to get to a situation where workers are crossing provincial borders and not finding that there are a bunch of different standards in place, so that equipment that they bought to use in construction in Nova Scotia is equally acceptable when they come to do work on a contract in New Brunswick.
Okay. Under education, what efforts do you have in place relative to education in the province to educate workers?
Yeah, so we do, we're sort of always in the mindset of education. So every single interaction that we have, whether that's a health and safety officer, or I guess more specifically our health and safety consultants, is really about educating employers on their obligations and assisting them in meeting those obligations and building health and safety programs. So our health and safety consultants specifically dedicate all of their time to helping workplaces develop health and safety programs. In addition to that, those boots on the ground, we utilize our different communication channels, whether that's through our website, Facebook, Twitter, all of those channels to push out health and safety messages. So we're relying on a number of different channels to do that.
You also have a conference coming up this spring?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. We have we're back in person in May, in early May, I believe May the 10th, with our health and safety conference. One of the highlights of our year, definitely. Mm-hmm. Typically, we get 500 to 600 registrants for that, and I'll put a plug in. We have a fantastic keynote speaker in Haley Wickenheiser joining us, so that'll be very interesting.
Key question I have to ask: why the switch from fall to spring? It's always been a tradition in the fall.
It has been a tradition in the fall. It's not a permanent. The spring is not a permanent thing. We're going to be moving back to having a fall rotation. It was just that COVID obviously prevented us from having an in-person event, and we didn't want to wait till the fall.
Okay.
We were excited about getting back in person, so we wanted to do it sooner or later. But we will be going back to a fall rotation.
Okay. On enforcement, and I guess you always get a lot of questions about enforcement. What's your focus these days when it comes to the topic of enforcement?
I would say, there are always certain areas that we would deem as high risk, and we paid particular attention to them. So those would be, from an industry standpoint, it would be construction, manufacturing, healthcare. From a specific issue standpoint, we're always focused in on areas like tag and lockout, fall arrest, trenching, excavation. These are areas. I would say probably one of the riskiest areas would be around fall arrest and falls from heights. That continues to be a concern for us. Too many injuries occurring as a result of those types of incidents, and often they're very unforgiving. But having said all of that, I would say right now our focus is generally on what I would characterize as a return to the basics, because COVID hit and everyone was focused on COVID and COVID measures. All of the other workplace health and safety, and I'm not saying in every instance, but generally kind of took a back seat because this new COVID thing was here. And how are we gonna get set up from a COVID perspective with all of the requirements in the mandatory order to be able to continue to operate our business? And other things took a back seat. So now it's okay. We've not come all the way through that, but we've come a long ways. Now let's get back to basics, basic workplace health and safety, and that's really where our focus is right now. Getting everyone's minds reset, and getting back to the basics of health and safety.
Now we had some feedback from one of our earlier podcasts from a listener who said, "Do we need more enforcement? Why aren't we getting more enforcement?" How would you respond to a question from one of the folks in the province that says, "Hey, look, why aren't you guys doing more enforcement?"
Well, we've got. From an enforcement perspective, we have, give or take, we have about 24 at any given time. We have about 24 health and safety officers. We have 30,000 workplaces in the province. So if you do the math, I've done the math on it just to say if we were going to visit every single one of those 30,000 workplaces with 24 officers, we'd get to each workplace about once every 5 years. And we've thought about, do we need more officers? What I believe truly is we need a different approach. So to me, it's enforcement has its place, but it's going to be more about finding those health and safety leaders out in the province. That's really what we need to focus on, and partnerships. So we've been spending a lot of time trying to develop partnerships, which is like things like you're doing here with the podcast. A lot of times it's just about awareness, getting the health and safety message out, and then finding those leaders in workplaces and communities that can really carry the torch. One interesting thing that we're doing from a youth standpoint, I'm very passionate about health and safety for our youth. And we have a health and safety consultant who's specifically dedicated to youth initiatives. And one of the initiatives that she's working on is the identification of health and safety student ambassadors in schools. That's where we really need to start the discussion happening, maybe even earlier than that. But that's a really exciting thing that we've got underway, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
Industry initiatives. What do you have on the go right now?
Right now, we're really focused on primarily on fishing because we have the new legislation. But we are focused on, with the big changes in Regulation 91-191, we've been engaged with the construction industry because they're impacted quite significantly. We've had a few farming incidents recently, some very unfortunate incidents. So we're back. Over the years, we've had different focuses, and farming has been one of them that's kind of cycled in and out. We're now focusing on farming again. The other area is really residential construction. So just sort of back to those ideas of fall arrest and those types of injuries, falls from heights that are significant. So we've recently had a specific initiative on residential construction, and we'll discuss whether we'll refocus again efforts in that area in the spring. And then we're always focused, and we'll be in the upcoming months, on road safety as well. Okay. So we partner with DTI and with the road builders in trying to get messaging out about road safety.
Now, you mentioned the fishing industry. Do you have a sense of how many people are employed in the fishing industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that, and I'd asked my team about that at one point, and the numbers I got were in the 5,000 to 6,000 range. Yeah, about, if I recall correctly, I think somewhere in the vicinity of 1,500 to 2,000 fishing vessels and 5,000 to 6,000 or 7,000 workers. Yeah.
Workplace accidents, unfortunately, they still are happening. When one does happen, what's the kind of process? People keep asking me, what's the process of WorkSafe goes through relative to the investigation all the way through to the potential prosecution?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting area. So anytime that we have what we deem to be a serious workplace injury, we do an investigation. So, anytime, I'll just use as an example, if there's a workplace fatality, we're going to do an investigation every time. So really the way that works, I'll just kind of take you through it step by step. I mean, we'll receive a report of an accident. We dispatch a health and safety officer to the scene of the accident. There's a determination made. So in the case of a workplace fatality, the determination is pretty straightforward. The health and safety officer will then call in an investigation officer. So we have a team. We have the 24 health and safety officers I mentioned. We also have a team of 4 investigation officers led by a manager. And their specific job is to do investigations. So it's not done by the health and safety officer. It's done by the investigation officer. So they'll get the call from the health and safety officer. They'll go to the scene of the accident. They'll secure the scene of the accident, issue stop work orders if necessary, so that they can begin the process of collecting evidence. So there may be evidence, obviously, at the location that the accident happened. That's one piece of evidence. But then they also conduct interviews. So if there are witnesses to the accident, whoever may be relevant, whoever may have relevant information, there will be an interview conducted, and testimony will be taken by the investigation officer. They take away all of that evidence, the results of their questioning the witnesses, and they'll start to do a root cause analysis. And we may have the capabilities to do that internally, or we may have to engage with a third party to help us out. So it just depends on the nature of the accident. If it's an equipment failure, we may not have the expertise in-house to say, like, we need to do this analysis. We may have to bring in a third party to help us. But we want to do this root cause analysis because really, and this is where, to me, the biggest benefit of doing the investigation is, let's figure out how this happened, why this happened, so that we can put in measures to prevent it from happening again. So we do a root cause analysis. We then determine whether we're going to issue orders in the first instance. And then what we do is we have a conversation where we work very closely with the Crown. And we'll have a conversation about what, the root cause analysis, the evidence we've collected, and there'll be a discussion about whether or not to pursue charges. And really, the Crown will make that determination, and it'll be based on the evidence. What's the likelihood of a successful prosecution? If they deem it to be likely that they're going to be successful, and normally any cases that go forward have been successful, then they pursue that. The other piece that I want to mention is, throughout this process, we're in contact with the family to offer support services, and that's a very key component of this. Like, we're often one of the first points of contact for the families that are in the case of a workplace fatality that are left behind. So we're there we're there to offer support services and the services of third parties to help and to provide counseling.
Now, Bill C-45. There's a current case working its way through the legal system. I was asked at a workshop a few months ago, is that WorkSafe arrives on a scene of an accident, use your example, fatality. How do they know whether or not this is going to work its way through your normal accident process, investigation process, or whether or not it possibly is a Bill C-45 case?
So just like we work closely with the Crown, we also work closely with law enforcement. So oftentimes in the case of a fatality, most times law enforcement will be there as well. And they will, we'll have that conversation. Ultimately, they will make a determination of whether they think that there are criminal charges here. But again, we're working closely with them. They're there typically on scene, and they'll make that call as to whether they feel that there's successful charges from that standpoint. It's fairly rare that occurs.
Fine levels in our province, how do they compare to other jurisdictions?
It's a mixed bag, I guess, if you go across the country. Right now, our maximum fine is set at $250,000. If you looked at our counterparts, $250,000 may be a little bit on the low side, but I would argue that it's still pretty significant. And we've had recently had fines levied of, in one instance, $200,000, in a couple of other instances that come to mind, $125,000 per instance. So that's significant. And we also have now administrative penalties, which is new. That was new legislation in the last couple of years, so that our officers have the ability to issue penalties, right at the time, in the moment, as opposed to you going through a prosecution process usually takes several months. But now, depending on the nature of the infraction, the officers have the ability to issue administrative penalties. Now, depending on the party, because it could be the worker, this supervisor, or the employer, the penalty ranges from $100 for an incident to a couple of $1,000s per an incident. But just while we're touching on fines, I do want to say that I was very pleased with legislative change that allows for judges to determine or to allocate fines, I guess, to health and safety initiatives. So prior to this legislation coming into force, I'll use the example of the $125,000 fine. Company was fined $125,000. That money would just go back to the province's general fund. Now with this new legislation, the judge has the ability to say, no, that $125,000 is going to go to, create a scholarship, or, to help fund the safety association in the industry in which the incident occurred. So that's really good news, and that's not something that every province has. So I think that's really beneficial, because similar to the root cause analysis on the investigations, right? What you want to do is you want to be able to take something good from a workplace tragedy, and that good that you're taking could be in the form of initiatives that prevent those similar types of injuries happening in the future.
So on the prevention end, any specific initiatives that you folks have in place that maybe you'd like to talk about over the next year or even 3 years?
Well, we've definitely touched on the health and safety conference, which is good. That's back, so I'm hoping everyone will be able to find their way to the Fredericton Convention Center in May. We have a couple. I mentioned youth. We have a couple of other initiatives for our youth. We're getting back to safety days. So we go around the province. This year, I think we'll plan to do 2 safety days. But effectively, what safety days are is we have sponsors that set up safety stations in a school. So we may be in a school. This started in Florenceville, so I'll use that as an example. And I guess we're not in the school, but in an arena, and these safety workstations are set up, and it's designed for grade 4 and 5 students. And basically what happens is they come in and rotate through the safety stations, and they learn about safety, and whether it's fishing, construction. It started off as agricultural safety days, so potato harvesting safety. So we're going to have that again, which I'm really excited about. We're doing a lot of work around joint health and safety committees and minutes. Health and safety committee minutes. So I feel like there's probably a gold mine of information embedded in joint health and safety committee minutes. Right now, we don't have really effective ways of getting at that information. So we've been working on a project to really figure out how we can do that, how we can better leverage what's happening and the discussions that those health and safety committees are having, so that can help inform us where there may be risks and what we might need to focus on. So we have a big project underway to do that. The final thing I would mention, I guess, is we're always looking at better ways to do things. So we have done a bit of a restructuring in our prevention division to sort of more closely align our groups of health and safety officers and our groups of health and safety consultants to really try and streamline things so that we're better able to offer a quality service.
Okay, good. How did you do that now?
That was...
Or what's your new model? I should say maybe more.
Yeah.
What's your new model look like?
Yeah.
So in the workplace.
Yeah. So again, it was really like realigning. So we had at one time more of a sort of regional service delivery structure, where we would have health and safety consultants, officers, ergonomists, occupational hygienists sort of embedded in the regions, and they would focus on their own region. We moved now to more of a model where it's not regional, it's more centralized in terms of the type of service. So we have the health and safety officers as one team, not sort of as 4 different teams in the region.
Okay.
Same with our health and safety consultants, and that's really to drive like some consistency in the way we're doing our work, right? So we don't have we don't have 4 different things happening in different parts of the province. We're approaching things consistently at a WorkSafe New Brunswick level. And we really feel like this is going to set us up better to better equip our teams, but make sure we've got the right competencies in place, and all designed to create good value for our clients. And good value for our clients is healthier and safer workplaces.
One topic we hear a lot about in the media these days: violence in the workplace. Any specific initiatives you have on the go there? I guess generally maybe the question should be, do you think we're doing enough when it comes to addressing issues of violence in the workplace when it comes to areas like the education system, nursing, and so on?
I would say until it's almost non-existent, that we're never doing enough. We definitely need to do more. I am thankful that we haven't had, not to say that we haven't had any, but we haven't had a lot of reports to WorkSafe about violence and harassment in the workplace. But again, I guess it's similar to serious accidents. As long as you're above zero, there's more work to do. Now, we've done, from a violence and harassment standpoint, we did have new legislation introduced. I believe that was back in 2019. That requires every workplace to do a risk assessment. Are you at risk for violence in the workplace? And depending on the results of that risk assessment, you're mandated to do certain things, right? To develop a policy on violence and harassment, develop a code of practice. So we've been working, we've been working on materials, and we have materials available out on our website that really provide guidance, and on our app, health and safety app, that provide guidance to workplaces in terms of doing a risk assessment. So you'll find templates out there, and then depending on the results of that risk assessment, here's, if you have to develop a code of practice, here's a template, here's what that might look like. So we've done a lot of work to try and make that easier for workplaces.
One final comment, and then I'm going to ask my final question. You have a health and safety legislation app. Tell folks about that.
Yeah, so it's all right there. It's all right there on your phone. The Occupational Health and Safety app. We've had it for a number of years, and I know a lot of people in the province have it and use it a lot. But anytime I have an opportunity to create awareness of it for other people, I'm happy to do so. And it really gives you everything you need. Your Occupational Health and Safety Act, all the regulations, all the guidance related to a lot of specific issues it's all right there at your fingertips. So if you just search for WorkSafeNB OHS app, you should be able to find it fairly quickly, and you're not left with binders of information on health and safety that you have to flip through. It's right there at your fingertips.
Over the last decade, I've been doing a lot of courses around the province. I continue to recommend the app, and the feedback that I've received from it is phenomenal. Very seldom have I ever received as much positive feedback from folks as I've received on the app. They love it.
Oh, wow, that's really
so
good to
for
hear.
Your organization that develops tons of materials and resources, let me just say this, that folks love the app. They find it practical. They find it easy to use. And of course, nowadays, everybody carries their phone around.
Right.
It's turned out to be, I think, just a tremendous resource.
No, that's really good to hear. That's really good to hear. I thank you for that. And I think it also speaks to, like, you got to make, the simpler you can make things for people, the more likely you are to have success. Yeah.
So my final question. The board says, Tim, you've been here for a year now. You've done such a great job. If you had unlimited resources and the authority to make any changes you want, we're going to give you a freebie here. We're going to give you anything you want that you think will help make New Brunswick workplaces safer. What would you ask for? What would you do?
I'm going to say there are 3 things I would do. The first thing is I would mandate people to step up and become health and safety leaders. I really do believe we need to find those folks that, that have a passion for health and safety and can really carry the torch in the province and try and embed that mindset, in our youth, in their colleagues that are out in the workplaces. So those health and safety champions, finding those is one of the three. I would like to have, and we're doing work on this, I would like to have more leading indicator data so that I could figure out workplaces that are at risk before the accidents happen. We're doing a lot of work on predictive analytics. So if I could just like wave a magic wand and have that data so that I'm having the intervention before that fatality occurs or that exposure occurs, that would be ideal to me, because at the end of the day, right, the best thing we can do is prevent the injury from occurring in the first place. Then the final thing is, and I guess it's kind of, it's a little bit like the leaders, but I would like to see our more mature employers, mature from a health and safety program standpoint, because there are varying levels of maturity from a health and safety standpoint. I would like to see those larger, more mature employers really taking a leading role, and I know some of them are, because I know that some of them have actually done this podcast, but taking on a bigger role to help influence the smaller employers. And in many times, those smaller employers are, on their premises doing work. So I would have those folks playing a bigger role, and that's not to diminish the fact that many of them are playing a large role right now. But I would just see that sort of mentoring of the smaller, younger, less mature workplaces.
I think I'd be amiss as we finish off today's podcast. I think I'd very much be amiss if I didn't say this. During the last decade, when I'm delivering workshops, I always talk about the internal responsibility system. And for folks that may not be familiar, it's a concept really that all health and safety across Canada is based on. And the concept of the internal responsibility system is that the responsibility for health and safety in a workplace is the workplace's. It's not WorkSafeNB's. WorkSafeNB's responsibility is to create an environment, to put the mechanisms in place so that we have a healthy and safe province. But the whole basis of the internal responsibility system is that workplaces have to accept their own responsibility. It's theirs. They're the ones there every day. They know the hazards, they know the risk, they know the work, they know the processes, and that's why the system is as it is. And when you talk about collaboration, when you talk about leadership, really you're right on the mark as far as putting the onus where it is intended to be under our internal responsibility system, and that's with the workplace, to try and create their own responsibility to make sure that they keep their workplace safe.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point, and you're right. I just think back to, you asked me about enforcement on fishing vessels, right? And you talk about the responsibilities of the captain, but yeah, and it's the captain and it's the crew, and that's really the path forward. People need to understand, not only understand their responsibilities, they need to embrace that and be accountable. But you're absolutely right. We're trying to do our part with our team of 70 in the prevention division at WorkSafe to really create awareness. Yes, regulate in some parts, but create awareness and education, and really, as you say, get people to understand that they're the folks. Whether you're the worker, the supervisor, the manager, the owner, your responsibility. It's your responsibility for health and safety in the workplace.
Well, look, Tim, thank you very much for joining us today. Extremely informative on WorkSafeNB and their role. If you have any feedback that you would like to pass back to us relative to our podcast, you can reach us at podcast@ssnb.ca. In closing, I'd like to thank our executive producer, Mark Daigle, for his technical assistance. Stay safe, and you'll join us hopefully in a couple weeks' time for another podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it. And again, want to just say thank you for doing this, because this just speaks to, right, the people out there want to increase awareness of health and safety, and it's initiatives like this that are going to help get us there. So thank you very much.
Very much enjoyed doing it.